I'm doing it, man.
Don't do it, man.
Read the manual. Oh, what does it say? To play sub rogue, you need talents, essences, rotation, and more. To be able to out DPS every tank in your group? What the fuck? In this video, we will explain the basics and fundamentals of sub rogue so you can pick up the class right away and do some dungeons and raids. But there's more to the spec, so stay tuned. On the first row, you take Find Weakness. This option makes your Shadow Strike and Cheap Shot apply the Find Weakness debuff on a target where your physical attacks ignore 40% of the target's armor. That means up from 30% extra damage on certain targets. Not a lot to discuss here. The theory crafting and simulations done put the other two options behind this one. Although Weapon Master sounds interesting, it performs weaker than Find Weakness. Second row, you have Night Stalker as the best option, although not by much. This option actually started to scale better in later patches since it can suffer from energy starvation, which is less of an issue now that we have Memory of Lucid Dreams that solves part of that problem. If you want your rotation to be a tad smoother, you can go with Shadow Focus, but you will lose a tad bit of DPS. The third row brings you some rotational adjustments, mostly aimed at energy regeneration and combo point management. The fight is usually between Vigor and Deeper Stratagem, with Stratagem edging a bit in front. It has more damage and scales better since you have chances of generating extra combo points, which of course works better if the cap is increased to 6 instead of 5. This opens up a bit of flexibility when it comes to your finishers, but you will lose a bit on energy regeneration that would otherwise come with Vigor. Fourth row is the I don't want to die row. You can essentially go with whatever you want, although Cheat Death is usually the big contender. It's a staple rogue mechanic, plus enables you to soak certain mechanics that would otherwise kill someone else. You can change it for one of the others, which are a bit more niche, but hey, you probably know what you're doing here, right? The fifth talent row is unfortunately a bit weak when it comes to raiding, since CCing only works on ads, and there are very few ads in raids when compared to the amount of people killing them and able to CC them. As such, most of the options will take effect in dungeons, since the trash there is actually worth considering. Prey on the Weak is a popular choice, making your Cheap Shots and Kidneys apply a damage taken increase debuff on the target. This will happen mostly on priority targets. The alternative can be Night Terrors, making your Shuriken Storm slow enemies. This works when you want to kite packs or your tank needs to drop debuffs, affixes, and things like these. The sixth tier brings a few options depending on the content you'll be doing. For raiding and general single target, you will want Enveloping Shadows. This will help increase the uptime of Shadow Dance, giving you of course more damage, because this is what we will always want. But the spec revolves around stealth, and this makes your single target rotation be even a lot smoother over the course of 5 minutes or however long you'll be fighting that raid boss for. In dungeons, you will switch this up for Dark Shadow. This will give you more burst damage during your Shadow Dance, since that ends up being better in dungeon scenarios due to the nature of the fights. The last row fortunately comes with two options again. I swear, it seems like Blizzard are giving more options to the unpopular specs than to the ones that are meta. The raid option you will want is Master of Shadows. This works well in single target since it smoothens out the rotation with you being in combat for longer and all. It works really nicely with Enveloping Shadows as well, since you will have more Shadow Dances to work with. Secret Technique will be your AoE option. This is an extra finisher with a cooldown, and it will take priority over Eviscerate. The way it works, basically, when you use it, you deal good damage to your main target and cleave 50% of it to adjacent enemies. In AoE, you will end up doing more finishers than normal, so the cooldown of this one will be less of an issue than it would have normally been in single target. If you're just starting your rogue journey and for some reason you decided on sub, like, okay, whatever, then general stats you want to aim for are crit, followed by versatility, then mastery. Haste does not scale as well with sub as opposed to other specs that rogue has. This priority will usually favor single target encounters, while in AoE you will want mastery at the top, followed by crit, then versatility, and lastly haste. Agility has a weird priority here. Eye level is clearly important because after a certain point, even if your gear has really bad stats, the eye level being higher makes the bigger pool of bad stats be better than the smaller pool of good stats. And now you may be wondering, but when will this happen, Flame? Well, dear viewer, I don't know. You'll actually have to sim to be able to figure that one out. If you want to get the most out of the spec, as an example, here's how my stats sim. And you can tell that it's pretty different than the normal, and that's because of diminishing returns. The more you have of one stat, the weaker it becomes compared to the others. Although stats will help you choose between gear pieces, trinkets are not always as straightforward. You can go for trinkets that give you crit or mastery based on your stats and you will generally be okay. There are a few, however, that perform way better and aiming for them might be worth your while. Ashvane's Razor Coral that drops from Lady Ashvane herself is one of the best options you can take. It gives you crit and on top of that it gives you more crit. Good, huh? So good that even specs which don't favor critical strike as their main stat will actually aim for this trinket. And it works even better if you pair it with Dribbling Inkpot, another raid trinket that drops from Orgozoa. Making the damage tick of Inkpot crit is very attainable if you time your Ashvane properly, and it will prove to be a major portion of your overall damage. But let's say you will be doing more dungeons than raiding. Fair enough. There are good stat trinkets in Mythics as well. Two of the best are Deadeye Spyglass from Toldagor and Harlan's Loaded Die from Freehold. Coincidentally, these two perform better in AoE situations as well, which should work fine if you intend to do Mythics as your major type of content. There are of course other trinkets you can get, so don't feel cornered to just these four. Test them out, maybe even sim them and enjoy. Although the spec has options when it comes to talents, the Azurite traits are pretty cookie cutter at this point, with maybe one or two that you can change for raiding and dungeons. The first one you want to have is Knight's Vengeance, and you want to have this at least 2, but ideally 3 times. The damage of it scales, making your eviscerate hit very hard, which seems to be the focus of the rotation in general. Complement that with Inevitability once, the damage bit is welcome of course, but the extension of Symbols of Death each time you backstab or Shadow Strike is what really matters, and this part does not stack, making it a 1-point wonder trait. The third one you want once as well is the First Dance, and again, you really want it for the combo points. The haste is always nice, and this is partly the reason haste is ranking so low. Not only haste is an inferior stat, but getting a bunch of it from here will diminish its value overall. Lastly, you have multiple options to fill in the last spot, depending if you're raiding or doing dungeons. One thing you can get in raids is Loyal to the End, since it requires 4 other people to have it as well, for the full effect. Or you can sub it with either Blade in the Shadows or Replicating Shadows, which are both good in Mythic dungeons also. These are not particularly strong traits, but they will be better than any other option you might find. As for secondaries, Overwhelming Power is still the best DPS-wise, while Resounding Protection will be your defensive option on their respective rows of course. Not everyone is running these exact traits, so it doesn't have to be the build that makes or breaks your sub-rogue. Play around, sim what you have and choose appropriately, but you can still use this as a reference point. For the essences, most of the time you want the ones at rank 3 above anything else, although some specific choices will make your class play better. In raid, you want to go with Condensed Life Force in your major. This is a strong single target cooldown that will be incredibly strong at rank 3. Your first minor should always be Memory of Lucid Dreams, while your third can be more flexible. We recommend Conflict and Strife since versatility is not a bad stat for subtlety rogues, plus it has more uses. In dungeons, there are 2 main builds running at the moment, with some wild cards and mavericks playing some weird shit in between. One of these builds that we recommend is fairly simple to get. Essence of the Focusing Iris in your major will be pretty straightforward. Memory of Lucid Dreams, and Conflict and Strife in your minors as well, so really not that different from your raid build. These are probably the easiest options to go with, the only one that might prove more difficult being Conflict and Strife, but hey, a badass rogue such as yourself will not be stopped by 1k raiding arenas now, will you? You can change the beam for Blood of the Enemy as well, and it's used almost as much as beam, but requires a bit more effort to get. Up to you, however. And you can catch us doing this and a lot more on our stream, twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline, where we play, test, theorycraft a lot of the specs, and usually we gather footage for our guides during that time, which you can probably tell by watching this video. If that's your jam, or you simply want to talk some WoW, then head on to our twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline. A standard raid boss opener starts with you pre-potting before the pool and of course being in stealth. Use Shadow Strike and follow with Nightblade. Use your essence here, then pop Shadow Blades and Symbols of Death, Shadow Dance and then Shadow Strike twice. Eviscerate, Shadow Strike twice again and move on to the general rotation. In AoE, and especially if you have a priority target, you want to open with Shadow Strike and Nightblade, again followed by Symbols of Death. Use Shuriken Storm and Shadow Dance afterwards. Secret Technique, assuming you are in a dungeon scenario. Shuriken Storm next, followed by Eviscerate. Shuriken Storm again, followed by another Eviscerate. The purpose here is to use other targets to build up combo points with Shuriken and dump the damage into one target that has to go away quick. If you are fighting raid trash or simply don't have Secret Technique spec, then use Eviscerate instead. For normal AoE opener, you do the same thing, almost. You start with Shuriken Storm into Symbols of Death, then Shadow Dance, followed by Secret Technique, Shuriken Storm again, Eviscerate, Shuriken, and another Eviscerate. The only thing you might change here is apply Nightblade if the targets will live long enough. For rogues, you don't really have a priority since your main goal is to use as many high combo point finishers as possible, and since you have other things out of your control that can generate combo points, you'll always adapt on the fly. It's worth casting a finisher with one combo point less than your max than wasting a combo point by generating too many for you to use. You want to use Symbols of Death on cooldown and ideally pair it with a Shadow Dance. Shadow Blades also should be used almost on cooldown, but you want to keep it out of your stealth cooldown since it works off of you generating combo points than using finishers. Always enter Shadow Dance when you are about to cap on charges. Use Vanish to reapply Find Weakness with a Shadow Strike. And for however many flaws Subtlety might have in BFA, the rotation is where it shines. It's different, a bit more complex, and requires some dedication to master. This is usually a big seller for a lot of people when playing a specific class. When choosing what enchants and gems and buffs to get, you will mainly have to decide between Critical Strike and Mastery for raiding and dungeons respectively. For the sake of your eyes, we will only include the crit variant, but remember to switch to Mastery if you will be pushing heavy AoE content. A Chord of Critical Strike and Deadly Lava Lazuli will most likely be your most used consumables. On your weapons, you will get Force Multiplier on your main and Deadly Navigation on your offhand. You never want to have the same enchant twice since it will start to have diminishing returns, and for some reason Force Multiplier seems better on your main hand than offhand. The Greater Flask of the Currents is pretty self-explanatory, while the best potions to use are Unbridled Fury on single target, boss encounters, and Empowered Proximity when fighting packs of 4 or more enemies. Lastly, for food, the Feast will probably net you more DPS since the stat amount is high enough to outshine your secondary, but if it's not available, McDonald's always is. And if I really think about it, McDonald's never really abandoned me in the past. Always there, always ready to satisfy my needs. McDonald's, where the dreams are made. Dreams of playing a sub-rogue, am I right? Okay, it's no surprise to anybody that Sub-Rogue is not the best performing spec, or far from it at this point. That doesn't mean the spec is not fun, and that doesn't mean that it cannot clear high-end content. you can definitely push 20 keys, mythic rating, and you can see those kinds of players in the rogue community, which I want to give a special shout out as well, and an even more special shout out to Fu, one of the top subtlety rogues that helped us make this guide what it is, feedbacked on a lot of the things, and you know, made it more concise and more, let's say, professional. Also, a major shout out to the Wowhead's guide on Subtlety Rogue that had a lot of hints and a lot of explanations to the rotation that I was a little bit iffy with, so that's really cool. So if you guys want more in-depth things when it comes to rogues, be it for raids, be it for dungeons or whatever, check the Discord, check the Wowhead, and join the rogue community, because there's a lot of good rogues out there that are just oozing really cool information for you guys to use, and God knows Subtlety needs every little bit out there. And speaking of special people and shout outs, our patrons are not except for this. Guys, you are the real MVP. We really appreciate you. Keep growing and keep pledging to us. Every month we get more and more patrons, and listen, if you haven't seen your name on the video yet, that's probably just because we're editing these ahead of time and you guys are like pouring every week, so you'll eventually see your name there. But we love you and appreciate it, and if anybody else is interested in supporting our channel a little bit more, then you can check the links down in the description where you find links to our Patreon, our merch, and other things like that. And thank you for watching the video. Hope it was helpful, and I will see you next time.